I think anytime we hear a story about leadership, we look at it like it's common sense. But common sense is not common practice. And I think hearing the stories that these leaders provide give all of us a roadmap to being better at influencing other people.
I can't think of a better time to take advantage of the literally hundreds of years of experience that you will glean in a very succinct and practical way through the wonderful stories that are included in this book.
Each chapter in this book represents a different leader who is willing to share and impart their knowledge and wisdom to turn you into a leader.
The stories are inspiring and illustrative, and they offer insightful and practical advice from exceptional leaders who have achieved extraordinary accomplishments, transformations, and change.
I know that I've always found the most important thing I can do is watch other leaders. What makes them successful, and what can I emulate that might make me a better leader?
The personal stories of how individual leaders overcame the challenges that they were facing is going to be most helpful to people.
I think one of the things folks can get out of this book is learning from someone else's mistakes, right? I've learned a lot from my own mistakes along the way, and have been able to share some of that.
These are amazing people with incredible backgrounds, offering their own lessons of experience to all of us.
The biggest takeaway from Lessons from Leaders is that there's a wide variety of leadership styles, and it's important that you find the best style for you and be genuine to yourself.
The more you understand how leadership contributes to the goals and objectives of the organization, the better you're going to be at helping everybody to fit in, participate, and bring their best selves to work together.
Welcome everyone. Please let us know where you're joining from in the chat section today, and please add any of your questions throughout. We are thrilled to have you with us for a conversation on leadership, and we look forward to sharing some of the key leadership lessons from the book Lessons from Leaders. Lessons from Leaders is a diverse collection of candid stories from 15 remarkable leaders who share their insights, experiences, and the practical lessons we can all apply to shape our own personal leadership journeys. With that, I would like to introduce you to Sam Shriver, our host for today. He is the Executive Vice President of Thought Leadership and Training Transfer at the Center for Leadership Studies, the author of From Coach to Coach and the 4 Moments of Truth, and co-author of Lessons from Leaders. Welcome, Sam.
Susie, thank you very much. Appreciate all you've done to get this together today. Also to Eric behind the scenes working his technical magic, and to everybody from the Center for Leadership Studies that had something to do with putting together this book. I may have a credibility challenge here because it seems like I say this a lot when I do these LinkedIn Live events, but I am very jacked up, very excited, to speak with Sheila today, and I am confident that you will be as well. And thank you to all of you that are chatting in, where you're from right now, for giving up your time to hear what Sheila has to say. So appreciate it. Thanks again.
Absolutely. We're so excited to have one of the extraordinary leaders with us from the book, Sheila Simon. She's a professor of law and the former trailblazing Lieutenant Governor of Illinois, who is the daughter of former U.S. Senator Paul Simon, State Representative Jean Hurley Simon. She is also a leader in Lessons from Leaders and her chapter, Just Keep Pushing. Sheila, thank you so much for being with us today.
Hey, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me to join you. And thanks to all the cool people from all sorts of places around the world. This is very fun.
All right, Sam, over to you.
Here we go. Good enough. And Sheila, Susie mentioned it in your background, but the first question I got to ask you is what was it like growing up as a kid? And I'm sure, like I said, we said in the preamble here, I'm probably only the 50,000th person that's ever asked you this question, so I'm sorry, not more original here. But what's it like growing up in a household where both of your parents are politicians? One, winds up running for the presidency. What's it like growing up behind the scenes in that environment? If you could give us a brief overview.
So I'm biased, but I think it was completely wonderful. And I also don't have anything else to compare it to, right? Because this is what my dad did my entire life. What's it like to grow up in the household of people who do plumbing for a living? People know that who grow up in those circumstances. So I only know what I have, but I can tell you that there are features of our family life when I was a kid that were maybe a little bit different. Like, for example, breakfast is devoted to reading the newspapers. And if you have someone stay overnight, they better know that we don't talk at breakfast, we only read the newspaper. Right? But and there were certainly some negatives that came along with it. My dad was, publicly criticized for stuff. And when I was little, I don't think I understood that too well. But huge advantages too. When my dad was first elected to Congress, it was just after Watergate. And we went to someone's backyard barbecue, and George McGovern was there. And George McGovern went to get a soda out of the refrigerator at the same time my brother and I did. So we just said, hey, could you explain Watergate to us? We were in grade school, right? And George McGovern explained Watergate to me and my brother in terms that we could understand. Not everyone gets that advantage growing up. So there's some really cool advantages. Maybe the best advantage is just knowing from the get-go that you have a place in democracy, that it's all of ours, that we have a right to be engaged and maybe an obligation to be engaged.
Yeah, that is really cool. By the way, you might imagine breakfast at our house was a lot different, not as me as a kid growing up, but with me as the parent. And I was the person that was actually getting most of the criticism, but I was getting it from my immediate family. So it wasn't. So it sounds kind of like, breakfast was research, but it was a fairly open exchange where early in life you're learning about arguably the most important things that are going on in the world and different vantage points and different viewpoints and all of that sort of thing. Was there any sort of gag order that was put on you, like what we're going to talk about here at dinner when we get to the point is we're not going to school and sharing this or sharing that?
No, it was all Dad was pretty open. Dad was a journalist before he got into politics. And so I think one of his motivations was always asking the next question, sharing the information. He was all about getting more people to get in on something. So there was never a gag rule. I think the only time I ever messed up on saying a little too much was, when Jimmy Carter was president and was challenged in the primary by Ted Kennedy. My dad supported Ted Kennedy, and at the Democratic Convention, which I went to as a volunteer, which will tell you how old I am and how old this time period was. My volunteer job was as a runner. I would literally run messages from the phones outside the auditorium to the people inside because no one had cell phones. We didn't have these. I'm ancient. Anyway, after President Carter was renominated, a local newspaper asked me who I was going to vote for. And I said, well, I suppose I'll check out everyone and see what options are right. And that was not a good answer. That got some local headlines.
Dad, sorry, just let me get this out. A good lesson early on. Well, I tell you, transitioning, and your chapter was so good. It was just so very, very candid, and there's so much to offer in it. But I'm wondering if you had the opportunity, I hope you did, to sort of review some of the other contributing leaders in the book, and if so, what other messages kind of resonated with you and why?
So as a former high school and college athlete, and tall enough to be always asked whether I play basketball, Pat Summitt just jumped out at me when I looked at the table of contents on the book. And I have to say I'm honored to be in a book with Pat Summitt because what a sports hero, what an amazing woman. And what stood out to me about what she said was an extended concept of family. And I think that's a really good scope to look at things through, because we all understand how a family works or how it should work. And to be able to incorporate people beyond your biological relatives into a system that's a family tells you a little bit about how you can get that organization moving, but what's your level of respect and care for the people that you're working with. So I thought she was on the mark.
Well, I'll tell you what, not unlike you, I will tell you that I was honored by the opportunity to have interviewed, Pat Summit. And like I say, very much like you, she was the first thing that hit you is she was just so gracious and other-centered, like with you on this link, like you're seeing people that are checking in from India to Arizona to Cary, North Carolina, and saying hello and chatting with them and everything. She was very, very much that way. And it was really kind of weird, because she was really concerned about, our camera crew and everybody okay? Is the temperature all right? Do I look okay? All of that kind of stuff. And she was also probably the most intense person and competitive, but really, really good way. Just like, we are going to be successful. We are going to win. We are going to give everything we can possibly give, to this effort. Let the chips fall where they may, but gracious and intense, I think, would be the the qualities that came from her in a very competitive environment. So that it's interesting that you mentioned her. Did you play basketball? Were you a basketball?
I did not. I'm terrible at basketball and always have been, but I was successful in track and field. So I always have enjoyed athletics, and I came along right at the right time for Title IX. Again, this dates me. Young women who are watching this won't have known an era when they couldn't join the sports teams. But I was just right on the cusp, and I got to participate in sports in high school and college, and really learned a lot from that about self-discipline, about making myself do it, and what I can achieve through that.
What role, if you don't mind me asking, and this is way off script, right? So this is one of those moments where we had some stuff that we were going to talk about, and this is kind of an impromptu deal here. But did you learn lessons from sports, from leadership, from people that were coaches or peers or whatever that later helped you in politics or with whatever you were doing in life as a leader?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think so. Track and field is a mostly individual sport where you compete against yourself and against others. But unless you're on a relay team, it's not directly involved with other people. But to be able to, you can share all of the discipline, all of the hard work that goes in with other people, and that makes it better, right? And so my event, there's more details than you want here, but what I competed in was the high jump, which is the easiest event in track and field. It's like 10 steps, take a jump, land in a soft area, and rest before you have to do it again. It's nothing like the hard work that other people do, right? So when we do our workouts, when we'd have to run the 2 miles to warm up for practice, that was a challenge for me. And to have people that I could do that with, that I could share the challenge with, meant I would be able to get through it better. And it also meant something to how it all worked in the end, that it wasn't just my victory. It was the shot putters that I was running with as the real runners took off. I learned a lot about working together with other people and how that process of working together builds bonds that really that can pay off later.
Yeah, very well stated. Very well stated. I would. You've dated yourself. You're the one that's, like I don't have to say like you and I are in the exact same era. But I'm wondering, in terms of when you got into the world of work, the world of politics, like, okay, so you're out of school getting jobs. How many women role models as leaders were there? Did you have? I mean, you grew up with one, obviously, in your family, but just in terms of sort of looking out there at, kind of what you wanted to do career-wise, it doesn't hit me at the time like it was sort of a 50-50 representation.
No, it sure wasn't. It sure wasn't.
Yeah.
There were not a lot of female role models. There were no women who had been a U.S. Senator from Illinois. There had been just a handful of women in statewide office in Illinois. I was fortunate enough to get to know one of them, Dawn Clark Netsch, who was the first comptroller of the state of Illinois, sort of the bill payer, and pretty important to a state that's always in debt. And gosh, I learned a lot from her. And I'm probably things that I could have learned from any other elected official, but it was because I saw, hey, there's something she's doing. I can do that too. It was that sense of, she made it real for me. I paid much more attention to what she said than to other folks, just because that was something that the rest of the old guys didn't offer me, that I didn't see myself in them. But I saw myself in Dawn Clark Netsch, and she was a hero of mine. She was pretty fabulous.
Yeah. I don't know if you had a chance to read Frances Hesselbein's chapter, but I mean, she said, and it was former CEO of the Girl Scouts and a Presidential Medal of Honor winner and all sorts of things in her illustrious career. But she very simply states, like, when people look at leadership, do they see themselves? Mm-hmm. I mean, and I don't know that there has to be necessarily a one-to-one kind of, but do you, if you're looking up the chain of command, whatever that chain of command happens to be, is there some representation,
right,
okay, that says to you as you begin that journey, you can do this, you can figure this out. It's not going to be simple or easy or whatever. I will tell you, I'll go into this. I thought it was one of the most, it was one of the quotes in your chapter where I just kind of went, and I had to, reflect for a moment or two. But you said, sometimes men have unearned overconfidence.
Yeah.
Just like I say, just that there's let's unpack that a little bit. So your very candid, comment. Sometimes men, when you were, they have unearned overconfidence. What did you mean there?
Yeah. So when you think about in political life, women running for office, men running for office, men run in much greater numbers than women. Women often have to be asked to run for office. Women more often have a specific purpose in mind. I want to run for office because I want to help my town deal with this problem. Whereas men just more often see themselves as, oh, I'm qualified to do this. So the unearned overconfidence, unmerited overconfidence. My best example of this is my husband and I have been married now 33 years. When we first started dating, he told me, oh, I don't have to wear my glasses when I drive all the time. I wear them sometimes, and sometimes I don't. And it wasn't until years later we found out we have the exact same prescription for our glasses. I wouldn't even go to the bathroom without my glasses on, right? We've just been brought up, as many young men are, to have incredible faith in themselves, even when it's not merited, even when they literally can't see what's in front of them.
Yeah. Do you see that? I got a comment on that quote in just a second. But do you see that in this day and age with everything, that we've gone through the last few years? do you see change there? Do you see a difference there? And if so, what is it, and how would you kind of, describe it so that we can get our hands around it?
Yeah, I see more and more often women having appropriate self-confidence, right? Sometimes men are overconfident, sometimes women are underconfident, particularly when it comes to the area that I know pretty well of political work. Sometimes the women really have to be talked into it, like, oh yeah, you're qualified, really, go for it. Whereas the men have no doubt that they're qualified. I see more and more often now women who can look at themselves and say, yeah, I might not know everything about all the laws of this jurisdiction, but I am qualified. I am a smart citizen who has the public interest at heart, and I can do a good job. So I see more and more of that. Interestingly, I think teaching classes during the pandemic and having so many events like this where we're all on a screen, I think has led to some additional sense of equality. There's no front row people. We're all literally in the same spot. And I'm not sure that we won't come out of this with maybe a little bit more assertiveness where it's appropriate.
Yeah.
Helpful.
Very, very well stated. Now, let's sort of reverse roles here. I'll say something, and then you sort of comment on what I'm saying. So I'll take the sort of the white man, like vantage point here. It's really, I couldn't agree more with your statement. For what it's worth. As I look back on, many years ago, as you painfully point out for me, just like there was a confidence, I don't know where it came from, I never really unpacked it, that when you went into the world of work, right, you were surrounded by people that you were comfortable with. There was always somebody to put their arm around you. There was always somebody to pull you aside. And it's you were unaware of people that didn't have that same set of circumstances.
Yes.
You were really just, it wasn't that you were like, necessarily going out of your way to, well, let's keep this person down or that person down, but it was just like you were pursuing your own thing. I suppose you could say selfishly, but more accurately, I think you were just unaware of the role that confidence that you had to learn something new played in where you were, how you fit, all of those kinds of things. I think it's almost impossible, unless you're just lost in this day and age, not to be more aware of people that don't have what you have. And I think beyond that, to even take more of a role in sort of reaching out and ensuring that we really do have something that remotely resembles an equal playing field.
Yeah.
Like, okay, now we can compete. Okay, we're doing you're a high jumper, and the bar is set at the same height for everybody. It's not down here for some and up there for others. But do you see this as well, whether it's in the classroom or just still with your political contacts or whatever? Or?
Yeah. So here's how I would describe this, that sense of not knowing how supported you are. And this is another athletic comparison. I'm not a high jumper anymore, but I do ride my bike a lot. And as a biker, you never feel the wind at your back, right? It's pushing you. It's pushing you. It's giving you a huge advantage, but you don't feel it. And so when my husband and I go out for a bike ride, we'll figure out where the wind's coming from. Today, the wind is, not too bad. Looks like it's coming from the south. So we'll probably head south into the wind. And then when we come back, we'll have the wind helping us come back. And when you're riding with the wind, you have this great feeling like, oh, my workouts are paying off. I'm getting stronger. But you don't know that it's the wind at your back that's pushing you, because you literally can't feel it. It's just a part of how it's going on. And I think having folks who are your immediate supervisor and the supervisor above them and your doctor and your president all look like you, no one's gonna realize that's an advantage, but it helps you slide into everything that you do. So I think you're exactly right that now we are much more aware of these things and how we need to make change. But boy, it's so important to see yourself able to move into a role. When my daughters were little, we have 2 daughters, and when they were little, I was an assistant state's attorney. So I spent a lot of time with law enforcement officers in the county. A lot of them were women. And so the girls got to meet a lot of female deputy sheriffs, female police officers. And I can't remember which daughter it was. One of them came home from preschool one day, and she was all excited. She said, "We had a talk about safety today from a police officer." And then she paused. You could almost hear the commas around the phrase. She said, "He was a boy." And then she went on and finished the sentence, right? And it just struck me, when I was a kid, I never would have had to say the police officer was a boy, because that's the only way police officers were. But here in this age, my daughters are growing up with a female pediatrician, knowing lots of female law enforcement officers, and they can see themselves doing any of those things. I don't have to teach it. I don't have to go out of my way. It's just there and obvious to them. And that's a wonderful change that we need to see more of. We need to have everyone be able to see themselves as someone who can make that amazing contribution that they're built to do.
Yeah, and this is where I go out of my way not to put words in your mouth, but what I hear you saying is, like, you're seeing that progression. There is evidence of that change, and it's getting real, right? There's some tangible things that are being done in politics and organizations, and that we're really now doing far more than giving lip service to it. We're actually, making those changes and seeing that through. Is that a fair?
Absolutely. It's more real now. So I was the second female lieutenant governor of the state of Illinois, and lieutenant governor, first, so everyone understands this, is not that big of a deal. There is an association of lieutenant governors.
It looks pretty intimidating on a resume. So I thought it was a big deal. Okay.
No. Big deal. John Nance Garner said the vice presidency wasn't worth more than a warm bucket of spit. And that's the cleaned up version of that quote. His original language was just a bit off. But anyway, because I was the second female lieutenant governor, it just never came up, right? The first one is a pioneer. The second one, you're just doing your job. And that's a pretty wonderful spot to be in.
Yeah. You're just, you're out there to take a look. But yeah, like when you're a trailblazer, Speaking of being a trailblazer, I think it was Maria that made the point in the chat here that you mentioned in your chapter about, like, learning from other people's mistakes, right?
I actually mentioned learning from my mistakes.
Yeah. So like, what would you say, like, what mistakes did you make? And of course, we've all made them, right? Like, where you look back and you go, okay, what was I thinking there? What was I doing, right? And I'm so glad that I'm interviewing you and that I don't have to respond to that question, because that would be the 4-hour podcast. But like, looking back as you sort of think about leadership and, wow, I wish I could have done that differently. What was the mistake? What did you learn from it? What would you like to have other people at least consider from the dynamics you worked your way through?
Yeah, it was actually a great question that was posed to me in the process of you guys working on this book, and I hate to say I didn't have to search. Really quickly came to mind a failure of mine in terms of being lieutenant governor. One of the things I wanted to push was improving our economic disclosure of elected officials in the state of Illinois. In Illinois, for those of you who are not from the United States, wow, we have a really great reputation for dishonest politics. We're right up there with Louisiana for corruption. At one point, we had 2 of our former governors in federal prison at the same time. So that's us. So one of the things I wanted to do was have a higher standard to say those of us who seek elected office and hold elected office ought to disclose more about their income and their assets so that people can see that we're not self-dealing, that people can make an assessment, or people can actually say, hey, you own stock in this or that company, maybe you should avoid voting on this issue. I think that's really important. And I worked with some wonderful people. One of the guys who's now the president of the state Senate put a lot of work into this bill and drove down to every last detail. And we got it passed through the Senate with only 1 vote against it. And then it went to the Illinois State House, where I was assured that they would work on it and this would be a priority for them. And I didn't push hard enough, and I didn't push hard enough fast enough, right? So that when it got to the end of the session, there were other things that were more important. Oh, Sheila, that's a great bill, but we really have to work on the budget now. I should have reinforced what I wanted to have done. And we might have come up with the same result, but I would have felt a lot better that I had done everything I could, because I clearly did not do everything to get that done. Good news is we've had more recent scandals in the state of Illinois and more resignations of some elected leaders. And there's a renewed interest in fixing our statement of economic interest and our disclosure. So that's one of the nice things about politics is good ideas can stick around even after the person who's proposed it is gone. I was on our Carbondale City Council for 4 years, and I loved that. Ran for mayor, lost the election. But one of the things I talked about was we ought to be having solar panels on City Hall. And that was years ago. But I can tell you that right now in Carbondale, Illinois, there are solar panels on City Hall. It was a good idea. And sometimes it just takes bringing up the good idea to get other people to hook onto it and keep it going.
Yeah, maybe you've already answered this, but I'm not that smart, and it takes me. But why didn't you push harder? If you look back at that moment, which obviously is a big thing, like what was driving that? I mean, you obviously noticed it. You were upset. It was kind of like, what was it? Fear of something, or what was going on? If you don't mind.
No, it was inappropriate trust. I had trusted some folks who I thought were trustworthy to carry this legislation, and I think they were protecting their own interest as they saw it. When you talk about disclosure of income and assets for lawmakers, and I love hanging out with elected officials. They're cool people, and in general, when you ask them, hey, here's a new bill I'd like you to support, they're going to say, how would this affect the folks in my district? It's a great question. But when you ask them about would you, as an elected leader, be willing to disclose more about your own personal finances? They don't say, how would this affect the people in my district? They say, oh, how would that affect me? And that got a little scary to some folks. And I got the message that the leadership was invested in making this happen, and that was not the case. So that's what I learned, is I should have done more checking, should have done more follow through, probably a whole list of things I could have done to push on that harder.
Yeah, and I would think just in general with leaders and with the followers that make them leaders, that you want to trust people.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of a human thing, right? It's like, okay, you said you were going to do something. We looked each other in the eye. We had this understanding.
Yeah.
We walked away from it, and then you did something drastically different than what I thought you were going to do. And if nothing else, like the crux of leadership lies in those moments. Is that the minute that people, the minute you have dishonored your word, right? Even on a little thing, let alone boy, it's that much more difficult for me to ever trust you again, or maybe trust somebody else that happens to be occupying your role. I can really get turned off to it, the entire way. But I think you put a very positive spin on the whole idea. It's kind of like you're taking responsibility for that. I was too quick to trust.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of, this was new. I was doing something and somebody said something, it was great. We had all this momentum, and I didn't follow up, push hard enough, whatever it was. That I think is a very important lesson. One of the co-authors of Lessons from Leaders, the book was co-authored by Marshall Goldsmith, myself, and Kathy McDermott. But Kathy described you, and I can see why now. She described you as uber smart. Now, just in terms of taking a look at that, like, were you smart because it just was like things came easy to you, or did you work hard, or some combination of the two? But I'm assuming here you did fairly well in school, or any sort of
Yeah. There's that. Yeah. So we talked earlier about my folks and what kind of influence they had on me. Ours was a household of reading. It wasn't just the newspapers in the morning. It was reading. That for my dad, it was always history and in current event kind of books. My mother loved those, and fiction. So here's one of the things that I don't know that I would describe myself as uber smart. I think one of my assets is knowing where I'm not smart, where to be able to recognize what I don't have going for me, and to be able to, when I was lieutenant governor, to build a staff that had different skills and could compensate for the weaknesses that I have. I do that even now as a professor. The teaching assistants that I choose to work with me, I always try and make sure that it's someone who's different from me in some way, so that if students are totally turned off by me, they can go and talk with the teaching assistant and maybe get the same message from a different person that'll make it easier to catch on to the ideas I want them to catch on to.
Yeah. I'm going to come back to this and ask a little bit about, IQ and EQ in just a second or two. But I want to take a very candid, unrehearsed bunny trail on this to something that you were talking about before about confidence. It is, as you tell the story of what it was like to grow up in your house, it's hard for me to imagine that you didn't walk into a classroom with a certain level of confidence. And the whole idea that, this is school, this is great, I get to learn things, I know things, I read the all of that kind of thing. How do you replicate that for kids in families that, like just maybe take worst possible case, although it's almost, but how do you systematically, what do we do to level that playing field at that level? So
That's such an important question to the success of our nation.
Yeah.
And I don't know that we have great answers to that yet. How do we build confidence in someone who has all the raw material and none of the support systems that certainly I got the benefit of growing up with? I do think there's a whole lot to understanding the process of learning. And I've seen fabulous teachers at work. And one of the ones that I learned the most from was my daughter's violin teacher, who said, we want the parents to be involved. I'm like, okay, how involved can I be? Can I bring my violin? So I know how to play Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star with the best of them. But I watched how this teacher broke down concepts that from the outside anyone would look at and say, oh yeah, that's playing the violin, that's high level stuff. She broke it down to individual bits that were manageable for that particular student. It was the ideal of learning. Know your student, know where your student's at, know how you can get this student to understand one concept at a time and build on that, right? It was a beautiful thing to see at work. Most classroom environments are not like that. There are many people at the same time, but we can work on that in terms of making sure that if it's a big and crazy concept like democracy, how do we bring it down to a third grade classroom? How do we tell third graders that that they're a part of making decisions about how our country behaves? The more we can do that, the more we can break things down into manageable and retainable chunks of information, then I think we're going to be more successful in seeing more and more people live up to that potential that they have, and that without the appropriate scaffolding, they might not get to.
Yeah. And by the way, thank you for saying that you thought I asked a very good question. I don't get that enough. Okay, so but just you mentioned a lot. It seems to me like you were involved with the violin teacher of your daughter. So
yeah.
She brought you in, kind of here's what we're doing, here's how it works, this is what, and I'm envisioning you, listening to the squeaky violin lessons, providing reinforcement and doing things and feedback to the teacher and all those sort of things. And it just it really hits, I think, at what we do for a living at the Center for Leadership Studies, where the training part of leadership is one thing. Like, if people show up into now one of our virtual programs, and hopefully again in the future, one of our live events, and we teach them situational leadership, right? Mm-hmm. Them becoming better leaders is a function of the system that surrounds them. Mm-hmm. And we provide sustainment tools, and we try to engage and do what we can do with the organizations we work with to reinforce that. But for any kind of learning, violin, democracy, leadership, whatever it is, it does, pardon the pun, take the village, right? It really is this collective thing. And I'm with you. That's a challenge in so very many walks of our life. And when I was talking before about, so I was overconfident. Why was I overconfident? You really start to unpack that. There's a whole lot of things that take place in your environment that you're not even aware of. Like, I would imagine as a kid, you were thinking, doesn't everybody read the paper at breakfast? I mean,
right.
And then all of a sudden you get to school, and man, do you know things that probably a lot of the teachers didn't know. But yeah, those are the challenges that keep leaders sort of trying to solve these very difficult problems in all sorts of different ways each and every day. Back to the IQ thing for a second or two. What's the role from your experience, based on your experience, between intelligence and emotional intelligence as it applies to leadership, getting people to follow, all of those kinds of things? Is there, on the basis of your experience, how does that work? What is one versus the other, or
You have the most skilled, the most successful people have both in great supply, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't have that kind of balance, then you're going to have to make up for it, right? If you don't have the emotional, if you don't have the ability to read a crowd, you're going to have to read other things to make up for that. But you can still be a leader. You can still use the tools that you have. If you have incredible emotional intelligence, if you can understand what people are feeling by how they're squirming in their chairs, then you're way ahead. You're way ahead when you're making the closing argument to the jury, for example, right? So there are lots of ways where you need to be able to use, ideally, a well-developed sense of smart and a really well-developed sense of how you communicate with people, how they communicate with you, and knowing them well enough to know what they might want. That's a super big deal.
Yeah. There's another chapter in the book by a fellow by the name of Justin Morgan, and he said it was pretty early in his career when he recognized that the best ideas don't always win. Mm-hmm. So just because you're smart and you've thought things out, and there's all sorts of resistance that you've got to be conscious of. Kind of in that context, and again, I believe another direct quote from you here. Leaders nudge rather than drag. There's a lot of sort of leadership style insight in that, I think. But what did you mean by that? Leaders are nudgers, not draggers.
Yeah. So if you and I and a bunch of our friends are getting together and I persuade you, I'm just like, hey, come on, you just gotta go to this concert with me. I promise you're gonna like it. And then you get there and you might absolutely love it. It might work out perfectly. But if I could say, hey, I'm gonna send you a link to this song that you just gotta listen to, then you might arrive at the idea on your own. Hey, did you know that they're going to be coming here and we can go to their concert? Then you're going to be much more invested in it than if I said, Sam, come on, just come with me to this concert, right?
Yeah.
If it's something that you have come to the realization of, then you've got that investment in it. And so if a good leader can, I think, can get people to see things, get people to come to their own conclusions, and hopefully they come to the conclusion that you want them to come to. But I think that is more successful for getting something done, particularly over the long term. If it's not just going to the concert together, but if it's going to take us a couple of years to get this law passed, you really need that commitment from people. You really need folks to be able to say, yes, that's really important. And I am with you on this. And what can I do to help make this go forward? That's the difference to me between nudging someone along the way, providing them the initial incentive to get with something, to look at it more closely so that they can figure it out. And then they're with you rather than just saying, darn it, you don't have a choice here. I'm going to make you do this, right? Yeah. Sometimes parents have to do that, right? You don't have a choice. You're going to get this vaccination, for example. We've been talking a lot about vaccinations recently. Yeah. Sometimes you just have to lay down the law. But if you can say, hey, this vaccination is going to help you be healthier and help you participate in the school play, then you got a little bit more investment in getting the vaccination.
In kind of explaining what's going on. By the way, we don't know each other well, and if we did, you would know that I suffer in emotional intelligence terms from a lack of impulse control. But I just had this this imagery of you being a very manipulative parent. where you know you're just suggesting things, you know, and like you say, you know, like son, daughter, whatever may not arrive at where you want them to arrive, but boy, you're really investing. If you nudge, you're really investing in that journey.
Yes.
In that thought process, in, you know, playing chess instead of checkers, and all of that sort of thing. Like, let's explore this, let's figure it out, let's get some evidence, let's get some facts, let's get some data, let's think these things through. That is nudging, manipulating, whatever. It really is kind of a philosophical approach to leadership that I think is very much in vogue right now, where it's not, I've got power, you know, I've got, you know, here's what we're going to do, and I'm going to ramp, you know, it's that there's almost, you breed resistance, you know, whether it's, you know, politically or in an organization or in a family or whatever it happens to be. And I think you reserve those kinds of approaches for things that are just critical. Just like, yeah, okay, we're not doing this. Okay, you know, or we are doing this, but it's, boy, that's the exception, you know, rather than the rule.
Yeah. So definitely, by the way, yes, manipulative parent. My daughters would tell you that for sure.
Good. And I bet they would give you high marks as well. Like, I was being manipulative. I didn't know it at the time, and it actually turned out really well. That was.
So here's one of those. So our older daughter turned 16, got her driver's license, and with her best friend, she announced that they were going to drive to Florida for spring break. And my husband's like, "Oh, we have to shut that down right now." And I said, "Well, let's have them make some of the plans. Let's see what they can come up with." Right. And so, of course, they figured out that at 16, you can't rent a hotel room. You got all sorts of things you can't do. And instead of driving to Florida for a week over spring break, they drove to Cape Girardeau, Missouri for an afternoon, but it was their decision.
They got to drive somewhere. They got to drive someplace, right? You know, it was good compromise.
They got to drive, and they were in charge of the process, right? So it was their process. And if I would have suggested, "Oh, honey, how about you just drive to Cape Girardeau, Missouri?" They would have said, "Take a hike, Mom." No uncertain terms. But if it's their process to get there, it has a little bit more value. Yeah. No, that is, you know, always you talk about the what and the how, you know, all the time in our world, right? And it's like, sometimes, right, people just react so aggressively to you providing any input to the how that it puts the what in question. But yeah, you're a master manipulator. That's good. That's why we have you in the book. Those key secrets are in chapter 12. One of the things that came up in chat here, and there's so many of them, but like, I think it was Maria again that wanted to know, like, what are you listening to? What programs are you watching? How are you staying current? What's sort of occupying, you know, kind of when you're got the TV on, you're like, what sorts of sources, what kinds of things are you listening to, if that's not too much of an invasion? No, that's a great question. And so again, back to a family that was brought up around newspapers. This is very much a focus. And while other people might think of a balanced diet in terms of how many carbohydrates and how much protein, for me, a balanced diet is making sure that my news sources are good. And so every day, electronically, read the New York Times, hard copy, the Southern Illinoisan, which doesn't have to be on everyone's reading list. It's the local newspaper, though, right? And it keeps track of local stuff, really local stuff. My husband and I are on the front page this morning because they opened up a bike lane in Carbondale on one of our main drags, and it's very exciting for the bikers. So print media in two different directions. In the evening, if we get home on time, local news, followed by national network news, followed by the PBS NewsHour. Those are sort of the daily staples of my diet. And then add in anything else for fun. There's just so much to read in so little time.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you, I would imagine like your classroom, like just, being with students provides you with a very fresh perspective each and every day as well. Although, and I guess, this is crazy, isn't it? We're at the end of our time here, but the last question I would have for you is, tell us what's going on in the future. What does leadership look like? What one message would you have for anybody that sees this LinkedIn Live thing that wants to become a more effective, more impactful leader? What would your advice be?
Yeah. So first of all, I'd say 2 points for you for being engaged here in this broadcast and the book. I'm not an expert in leadership. I'm just someone who's gotten there, right? So the fact that you're studying it is wonderful, and I compliment all of you. So definitely keep studying. And then I would say, watch out for leaders who don't look like what you think leaders look like, right? And I'm not just talking about the physical description of the guy in the dark suit, because I think we can all get over that. We can say, yeah, leaders are going to look different going forward. But leaders might also be in places where you don't expect them. They might be in the back of the bunch pushing forward. And keep in mind that there might be some great leaders that you ought to know about who are engaged in that kind of leadership, and you can learn a lot from them.
I just want to tell you in front of everybody, I can't tell you how much I've enjoyed this. I really can't. Let's hang out sometime. Let's hang out. If I ever get to Southern Illinois, I'm going to bang on your door and, catch you on the bike path. But sincere thanks from everybody for giving your time and for providing us with your wisdom in the book. I've thoroughly enjoyed this, and I can't imagine that anybody else that's hung around for an hour hasn't as well. So thank you.
You're very kind, and thanks to all the folks from all over. What a cool bunch you've collected here. So that says great things about you and your whole effort. So it's a treat. Thanks.
Well, let's kick it back to the lady that's behind that effort. Susie, thank you very much. And here you go.
Absolutely. Sam and Sheila, thank you for today's conversation. And like you all mentioned, just thank you for your time and willingness to share your leadership lessons with us. To learn more about Sheila Simon or Lessons from Leaders, please visit lessonsfromleadersbook.com. Also, if you're interested in signing up for future events, please register on the Center for Leadership Studies LinkedIn company page. Thanks again for joining.
This book will give you a wide array of really interesting, thoughtful, and practical ideas from some incredibly wise people.
It provides such a rich variety of leadership journeys from so many great leaders with different backgrounds, experiences, and areas of focus and service.
I think you're going to find this entertaining, it's going to be practical, and it's lessons from leaders that you can take back and use.
Pick up a copy of Lessons from Leaders.